As I walked among the olive trees here on the Mount of Olives, I could not help but sense the pain that this mountain witnessed nearly 2,000 years ago, as Jesus retreated here just before his arrest. But why would Jesus spend his final moments of freedom here? And what did it symbolize about his impending death? Well, after Jesus ate his Last Supper, he decided to retreat to a place to pray. The Bible calls that place a garden named Gethsemane.
It probably was an orchard that was cultivated around, and people did have crops coming from that. It probably was a place of olive orchards, and it's quite common around Jerusalem.
Today, there is a traditional location for the Garden of Gethsemane. It's a well-preserved garden with olive trees that are over 1,000 years old, possibly the descendants of the original ones Jesus saw himself. Now, this would have been more like a place where Jesus would have come, an open area with olive trees all around. But when Jesus came, it was night, and the location was ideal because from here, you can see the temple.
The Temple Mount is the center of life, of worship, and for Jesus was the center of the presence of his Father. So he would have taken great comfort from being able to look at that temple from most locations where he was around Jerusalem in the last days of his life.
Mark 14 describes the scene here. It says he took Peter, James, and John along with him. Then he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, he said to them.
Look at him pleading for help. Look how afraid he is. He says, my soul is overwhelmed and to the point of death. I don't think I've ever been to the point where I said that. I mean, I've been overwhelmed, but I never thought I literally was going to die.
The vice had begun to tighten around his life and his chest, and while his spirit understood the purpose of the imminent events, and his mind knew precisely the agenda, Jesus still felt the pressure. That's why this location was so significant. The word Gethsemane means olive press. The olives in this garden reminded Jesus of how crushed his body was going to be. In Nazareth village, there's a real working olive oil press, just like they used in the first century. The olives are collected and then placed inside of a circular trough that houses a huge round millstone. It rolls over the olives and crushes them. Then the freshly crushed olives are placed inside of a basket and put inside of a press. Weights are added to that press and pushes on that basket, and precious oil from the olives flows down the side. Jesus knew God was about to pour out a cupful of wrath, drenching whoever stood under it. This was not a mouthful or a thimbleful, but a big, tall goblet of wrath. Jesus knew well what that expression meant, and he knew it wasn't going to be good. In fact, he trembled at the thought.
He knows what's going to happen. He knows he's going to taste death. And he prayed, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me, but nevertheless, thy will, not mine, be done. He always submitted to the Father. So it's one of those things like, I know I have to do this. I know I've chosen to do this because no man takes my life from me. I lay it down freely, John chapter 10, but it's going to hurt.
But instead of running away from the guards that were making their way up the hill, Jesus stayed put and prayed. He continued to feel the squeeze so much that an angel showed up to strengthen him. The only other time an angel showed up to comfort Jesus occurred in the wilderness, days without food and companionship. Luke 22:44 says, and being in anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. In medical terminology, it's called hematidrosis, a rare condition. It only occurs when someone is so overwhelmed with grief and sorrow.
His mind would have gone back to Abram sacrificing his son, like he was the son to be sacrificed by his father. Many thoughts would have gone through his head. No wonder that his sweat on his forehead appeared like drops of blood. We cannot begin to imagine the emotions that went through Christ when he was in that location.
Jesus was afraid. The language there suggests a picture of a man who is afraid. And look at his reaction. He falls on his face. He's not calmly, serenely praying. You know, he falls on the face. I can see grass stains and mud stains on his face, and in conjunction with the blood that's coming down, that's breaking through his skin from the blood veins. Here's God struggling to fulfill his work that he came to fulfill in the flesh. And when he prayed, Lord, if you could take this cup away from me, he meant it. He really meant it.
You know, if I were in the garden with Jesus, and I'm sure I would say to him, oh, it's going to be okay, or it'll all work out, or maybe you just need to have faith. Somehow I think these would all fall short with Jesus. Of course, everything God does works out, and of course, Jesus has faith. But that doesn't take away the pain, because Jesus was about to be brutalized beyond belief on every level, and he knew it, and he wasn't looking forward to it. He did not want to experience pain, and his soul was crushed.
Nobody wants to physically suffer like that. Nobody but a delusional person would bounce happily toward that end and say, this is what I've been waiting for. Oh boy, you know, now they're going to see. So I think, again, he's human here. And so he's differentiating those two. I don't want to do this. I don't want to suffer like this. I don't want to go through this kind of pain. But what I want is not as important as what you want. And so I do think that's a time of suffering. And I think simply knowing how things are going to turn out does not necessarily make suffering any less painful. I think it makes it more purposeful, but I don't think it makes it any less painful.
You know, we want life without pain, but even God sees it necessary to experience pain to get to a greater good. I have no right to ask for a pain-free life if Jesus allowed himself willingly to experience pain and torture of this world.
Jesus wanted one thing to soothe the pain: companionship. As I read the accounts of his time in the garden, he simply asked the disciples to stay with him and pray. But 3 times he found them sound asleep.
The whole world was about to be turned upside down, and all God wanted was a friend. It's amazing. You know, I guess I understand the antidote my friends require when they're distressed. They just want a friend. No sermons and no empty words of encouragement, just to be near them and available. The loneliness of this moment added another stone to his soul and crushing his spirit even further.
The Garden of Gethsemane shows me a side of Jesus that I did not expect, one that feared pain. But pain never was God's intention for this world. Thousands of years before, also in a garden, Adam and Eve chose their own desires over those of God. Their selfishness unleashed a flood of pain onto the earth that not only troubled mankind, but God himself. Jesus in this garden began the process of undoing that pain for those that believe in him.
You know, Revelation 21 tells us that in eternity, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, because the old order of things has passed away. You know, when my soul is crushed, I need only to think of that. This won't be forever. Eternity is just around the corner.